Hey everybody, my name is Dr. Scott Giacomucci, and I'm the author of Trauma-Informed Principles in Group Therapy, Psychodrama, and Organizations, Action Methods for Leadership. And today I want to talk to you a bit about the content from Chapter 4 of this book, which focuses on trauma-informed experiential sociometry processes, which are action-based group tools that we can use to make groups more engaging and more effective. And these tools come from the field of psychodrama. So I'm going to go through a series of different sociometry tools, and I'll explain them to you verbally, while also including some video clips that you can use to see them visually in case you're more of a visual learner. And then I'll also talk about some best practices for keeping these processes trauma-informed and preventing re-traumatization while you're facilitating them. So these experiential tools can be used in any group setting, including therapy groups, support groups, community groups, organizational meetings, supervision groups, and educational settings as well. When we're thinking about sociometry, it's important that we're also considering the warming up process as it relates to psychodrama and the work that we're doing. So in psychodrama theory, we first start with the warming up process, then we move into action, and then we end with some sort of integration or sharing. So when we're using sociometry in a psychodrama group, we're using it mostly for warming up. And there's some important considerations to keep in mind in terms of the warming up process as it relates to working with trauma survivors. So in a traditional psychodrama group, the warming up process could be pretty quick and we would move right into a psychodrama. However, I would recommend that when we're working with trauma survivors, especially folks who are earlier in the recovery journey, that it would be important that we take our time in the warming up process, that we don't just speed through it and jump right into a psychodrama, but that we really give the warming up process the time that it needs to effectively and adequately warm up the group. Folks who have experienced trauma are going to need a little bit more time to warm up than folks that have not experienced trauma. And we could even think about the very symptoms of PTSD as relating to a deficiency in spontaneity or a blockage that prevents us from accessing spontaneity, the energy that gives us the ability to have adequate responses to new situations and new responses to old reoccurring situations. And in psychodrama theory, the warming up process is all about helping us and helping our clients tap into spontaneity. So when we're working with folks that are experiencing PTSD or CPTSD, the warming up process is likely going to need a bit more time than usual. The warming up process, when we're employing sociometry, this is where we're cultivating that safety and we're cultivating the group cohesion. We're helping the group connect to each other and develop connections to the content, to the process. This is where oftentimes we use warm-up processes that involve some playfulness and some humor, and they allow group members to let their guard down a little bit and start to feel safe in the group, to connect with others. So the warming up process is particularly important, and these sociometry tools really help us to cultivate effective warm-ups with our groups. At the same time, these sociometry tools could also be used as the action phase of a group if we're not using psychodrama or sociodrama. So they're pretty versatile, and there's even creative ways we could use them to promote sharing in the third phase of psychodrama. So some of the processes we're going to cover in this video include the use of small groups, dyads and triads, the use of spectrograms, locograms, floor checks, step-in sociometry, sociograms, and the circle of strengths. And I want to talk about the 6 trauma-informed principles from SAMHSA as they relate to these processes, because these experiential processes inherently embody many of SAMHSA's trauma-informed care principles. And at the same time, as we're facilitating these processes, it would be important for us to keep in mind SAMHSA's 6 trauma-informed care principles to keep the process safe and effective and mitigate any risks for re-traumatization or causing harm. So these sociometry processes can include pen on paper exercises such as social atoms, role atoms, and sociograms, which we're not going to talk much about in this video. I've already posted some other videos that explain and demonstrate those pen to paper exercises. Instead, we're going to focus mostly on the experiential sociometry tools in this video. So these tools can be used at any stage of group development for psychoeducation, for engaging the group, for assessing the group, for offering interventions and therapy techniques within the group process, and also for evaluation at the end or at important milestones within the group's development. So they really are pretty versatile. They're especially important because they help us cultivate safety and that group cohesion, which is so important in groups and in group therapy. But they also provide the facilitator with some really important information about group dynamics and about where the group is and where individuals within the group are. So the first trauma-informed principle is safety. And these sociometry processes really give us an avenue for cultivating safety in the group, for helping participants develop connections with each other and start to feel safe within the relationships and the matrix of relationships within the group. We can't do any good therapeutic work without first establishing safety. It would be irresponsible for us to dive into trauma content or trauma reprocessing or powerful cathartic work if we haven't first established safety in the group. And that's exactly what these sociometry tools allow us to do and give us tools to cultivate within the group. So by positioning group members in ways that they can support each other and they can get to know and learn details about the other participants in the group, while in short increments sharing a little bit about themselves, we start to promote transparency and trust while cultivating safety. So that second trauma-informed principle of trust and transparency goes right along with safety. And really all of these 6 trauma-informed principles are connected to each other. It's hard to talk about them separately because they're all intertwined with each other. So sociometry tools help us develop trust within the group and trust between group members, as well as trust with the facilitator and the other members of the group. So they illuminate some of the sociodynamics or the group dynamics that are underneath the surface and sometimes right on the surface within the group. And they help participants develop more awareness of where they fit in within the group. So sociometry tools really allow us to cultivate that mutual aid and peer support within the group process. And so peer support is the third trauma-informed principle. And so sociometry is really unique in that it allows us to cultivate peer support in quick and efficient ways within the entire group. Instead of one person talking at a time during sociometry processes, we can have multiple instances of peer support and mutual aid occurring all at the same time. So it really maintains a group as a whole experience while promoting multiple instances of peer support concurrently. The fourth trauma-informed principle is about mutuality and collaboration. So sociometry processes, particularly the ones we're going to talk about in a minute, they help group members develop a sense of belongingness within the group, help them feel less isolated and disconnected. And sociometry also helps establish a sense of co-creation and mutual respect, that each person in the group has something important to offer to other group members and to the larger group process, and that through sociometry we're going to help extract that and pull that out and create space and opportunity for that to emerge. The fifth trauma-informed principle is about empowerment, voice, and choice. And because sociometry is inherently full of choices and amplifying the group voices as well as individual voices, it really helps participants feel empowered and gives them opportunities to practice making choices and to use their voice, to talk about what they prefer, what they want, what they need, and what they're warming up to. Sociometry helps us not just empower one group member, but it really promotes a sense of collective empowerment in the group process. And the sixth trauma-informed principle is all about identity, culture, gender, and historic issues. So sociometry allows us to explore and address issues related to identity within the group process. And we do that by looking at shared experiences and different experiences in a gradual and non-threatening way. So we can use prompts within our sociometry processes that relate to culture, that relate to race, that relate to gender, and issues of oppression. And this helps group members connect with each other based on shared experiences. The very nature of experiential sociometry is anti-oppressive in that it disrupts some of the traditional power dynamics within group therapy. Instead of focusing on the group therapist as the expert and as the person in power and the therapeutic power resting solely in the facilitator's hands, sociometry processes really dismantle some of that and instead put the therapeutic power and agency within the hands of each group member. And so in this way, they are inherently anti-oppressive. In talking about sociometry tools and talking about trauma-informed care, it's important that we keep in mind a 3-stage clinical map for safe and effective trauma therapy. And you'll find other videos on this channel that go into that 3-stage clinical map in detail. So I'm not going to do that in this video. But just as a quick refresher, there's 3 phases to this clinical map. Phase 1 is all about safety, it's about strengths, it's about connection and psychoeducation. So phase 2 is all about the trauma, the grief, the rage, the anger, the defense mechanisms. It's where we get to the more difficult content. And phase 3 of the clinical map is about integration and about growth and about the future. So how are we taking what we've learned and integrating it into our lives beyond the group? So these are the 3 phases of the clinical map. Start with safe, easy, strength-based, positive prompts. Then we move into the more difficult prompts related to trauma or the group goals or topics or issues. And then we end with future-oriented integrative prompts, perhaps related to post-traumatic growth. So it's important to keep in mind this clinical map before we start to talk about some of the specific sociometry tools. So the first tool I want to talk about, and the first tool that's outlined in Chapter 4, is about using small group exercises, breakout rooms, dyads, or triads. These are really simple. We essentially just break up the larger group into smaller groups. Perhaps the simplest way of doing this that mitigates what we call the sociodynamic effect, which is this underlying social force that results in people being unchosen or chosen last. We always want to be aware of this when we're facilitating groups, and especially when we're facilitating sociometry tools. So a simple way of breaking the group up into smaller groups, if you're on Zoom, you can use the random breakout room generator. If you're in person, you can simply ask the group to count off. So if I have a group of 15 participants and I want to create 5 groups of 3, I can ask the group to count off 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And we just go right around the circle. And then I ask all the 1s to come to this area of the room, all the 2s to go to a different area of the room, the 3s, the 4s, and the 5s. And we end up with 5 groups of 3. So there's lots of different ways that you could break the group up into smaller groups. Once you have them broken up into smaller groups, it helps to generate a series of prompts related to the group goals and individual goals and the group topic, while following that 3-phase clinical map. So for example, in some of my trauma groups, I might start by asking the clients to first share about a personal strength that they have that they think could help them in their recovery from trauma. Then I might ask them to share about one way the trauma has negatively impacted them, a way that it's interfering in their daily life or their relationships. And then as a third future-oriented prompt, I could ask them to share about one goal they have for their trauma recovery going forward. So we're following this 3-phase clinical map which allows the group members to titrate in and out of the difficult content while also practicing vulnerability with each other based on positive criteria. So these small groups are really simple, and the clients in one of my inpatient groups, they over and over again in their satisfaction surveys, they comment on how powerful these small groups are for them. That it's a lot more difficult and scary for them to share in front of a larger group with 10 or 15 participants than to share in a smaller group with just 2 or 3 other participants. That it feels a lot safer to share with 1 or 2 other people. And so because of this, I spend a lot of time in smaller groups during the early phases of my group development. These are very simple to facilitate. So even if you're a new group therapist or just learning about psychodrama, sociometry, and group dynamics, this is a really simple tool that you can use. It's much more efficient to break up the group into smaller groups than to stay as a larger group. In the example I provided a moment ago, we have 5 smaller groups all discussing the topic, their strengths, their trauma, and their goals, all at the same time, whereas if we had sat in a bigger circle, only one person would have been able to talk at a time. So we can get 5 times the work done by using smaller groups than if we were to stay as a larger group. Using small groups like this and breakout rooms really promotes mutual aid and peer support, which is that third trauma-informed principle. It positions group members to be therapeutic agents for each other, to support each other, to rely on each other, to show up for each other, and offer nurturing and insight for each other. So there's lots of good reasons to use these smaller groups, and if you wanted to learn more about this simple process, you could check out Chapter 4 in my book. Next, we're going to talk about spectrograms. So spectrograms are basically a group as a whole assessment from 0 to 10 or 1 to 10, and they allow participants to see where they fit in within the group based on specific topics or criterias or goals or experiences. So when we're in person doing spectrograms, we basically would designate one wall within the room to represent a 10 out of 10 on the spectrum, and the opposite wall in the room to represent a 0 or a 1 out of 10. And we would ask participants to imagine every space in between 10 and 1 on that spectrum within the space of the room. So an imaginary line or sliding scale. And then we would ask a prompt, and we would ask everyone in the group to go ahead and get up and place themselves on this sliding scale based on where they believe they fit in within the group and within the prompt. When we're online, a simple way of doing it is to use the height of the camera feed to represent the scale from 1 to 10 or from 0 to 10, however you're going to do it. So if I said the prompt is 1 to 10, how much experience do you have in therapy groups? It's a simple, easy prompt that's not going to be too vulnerable or overwhelming for anybody to answer. If we're online, someone who doesn't have much experience in therapy groups might put their hand lower on the spectrum, whereas someone that has a lot of experience in therapy groups might put their hand closer to the top of the spectrum. And similarly, in person, somebody with lots of experience might place themselves closer to the wall that we designated as a 10 out of 10, whereas someone who's in a therapy group for the first time might put themselves closer to the other wall that was designated as a 1 out of 10. So this allows everybody in the group, as well as the facilitator, to quickly see where everybody fits in within the prompt for the topic. It gives us a quick visual of the entire group at once. This is an exercise that is really useful for assessing the group and giving the facilitator lots of useful information about the group's warm-up and about where the group is at any given moment. So in a client group, I might start by asking something easy. How much experience do you have in therapy groups? And with each question, we could have some sharing either at the group level. Whoever wants to share aloud could share why they put themselves where they're at on the spectrum. Or we could ask everyone to share in smaller groups with somebody close to them to promote some more one-to-one connection within the group. After an easy question, then I would move to a more difficult question. Maybe I would ask, how anxious were you when you thought about coming to the therapy session today? 0 to 10. And then we get group members sharing about some of their anxiety and more difficult feelings. I could then ask an even more difficult question. 0 to 10, how much has trauma impacted your life? And we could promote some more sharing about trauma and individual goals within a trauma therapy group. And then I would end with something more hopeful and future-oriented. Maybe I would ask a question about resilience. How resilient do you judge yourself to be on a scale of 1 to 10? With strength-based and integrative questions, I often find it helpful and even necessary to change the spectrum a little bit and make it a 5 to 10. So on that last example of resilience, I might ask, on a scale of 5 to 10, how resilient do you judge yourself to be? And I would even tell the group why I'm doing that. I might say that it's pretty common for us to sell ourselves short or to judge that we're less resilient than we actually are. And if you've survived what you've been through and you've made it to a trauma therapy group, you're at least a 5 out of 10 in resiliency. And I'm just not going to allow you to sell yourself short on that. So this is from 5 to 10. So again, we're following that 3-phase clinical map in the way we're structuring these spectrogram prompts. If you wanted to learn more about spectrograms, I would encourage you to check out the longer video I created demonstrating them in action and discussing them further. The next tool I want to talk about is locograms. So locograms are basically a quick democratic group choice where we designate different corners of the room to represent the different options. So we could say, this corner of the room represents anxiety. This corner of the room represents depression. This corner of the room represents trauma. And this corner of the room represents something else. Go stand in the corner of the room that represents a topic or an issue that would help you the most if we were to focus on that for a group topic today. Or we could do it even simpler. If we're trying to figure out how we're going to manage an upcoming holiday time with a group, we could designate different options for different corners of the room. This corner of the room represents the option to continue to meet weekly through the holidays. This corner of the room represents the option of let's take a week off during the holidays. This corner of the room represents the option of let's not have a full therapy group during the holidays, but let's have a short Zoom check-in just to see how everybody's doing. And the other corner of the room could represent other, a different option that hasn't been named. And everybody could make a quick group choice or decision about what their preference is in terms of handling the upcoming holidays with the group. So locograms are inherently empowering in that they put the decision-making power in the group's hands instead of the facilitator's hands. Similar to locograms are what we call floor checks. So floor checks were created by Dr. Tian Dayton, and they were based on the original locograms, but she wanted to make the locograms a bit more dynamic and kind of evolve them into a longer, more involved process. So she created floor checks. Floor checks are similar to locograms. However, instead of just designating different areas of the room to represent the different options, we would print out different words or different subtopics within a larger theme or topic and place them throughout the floor, usually using many more options than just 4 or 5 options like we would in a locogram. With a floor check, Tian likes to use a dozen or more options. I found it useful to limit it to a set number of options based on how large the group is. So if I have a group of 15 participants, I might keep it short to 5 or 6 different options instead of using a dozen or 2 options. But both are useful ways of facilitating floor checks. The floor check, once we have it set up and we place the different options throughout the room, for example, if we're doing a feelings floor check, we could put paper with the word anger, and another piece with the word sadness, and another piece with the word fear, and another piece with the word guilt, and another one that says shame, and another one that says happy, and so on throughout the room. And then we would ask participants a series of questions and ask them to physically place themselves at the option that answers the question for them. So we could say, which feeling best describes your experience today? Go stand at that one. And everybody all at the same time would go stand at that one. And it would give everyone the opportunity to express how they're feeling quickly and efficiently without sitting in a circle and going one at a time, expressing their feelings check-in for the day. With floor checks, I find it really useful to have participants simply find someone that's standing at the same option as themselves, or somebody who's standing at an option nearby, and to share in a couple minutes why they chose that. So everybody gets to share in smaller groups about their choice. And again, this positions group members to support each other and to be therapeutic agents for each other. So this is an exercise that could be utilized alone as a group process or as a warm-up to a psychodrama or a creative arts therapy process or another writing process. We can modify floor checks for Zoom by using the breakout room feature. And if you're good with technology in Zoom, there's even an option where you can rename different breakout rooms, and you can give participants the option to choose their own breakout room. So you could rename the breakout rooms, the different feelings, and ask a prompt, and the participants could self-select the breakout room that they want to jump into based on their choice of feelings. So when we're using floor checks, just like any other sociometry tool, in order to keep the process trauma-informed and safe, it really helps to be following that clinical map. So we start with something simple, how are you feeling today? Then we move into something a little more difficult, which feeling do you most try to avoid in your life? Then we might move into a positive and future-oriented prompt, something strength-based perhaps. Which feeling have you gotten better at dealing with or coping with in the past couple months? So if you wanted to learn more about floor checks, I would encourage you to check out the other video on this channel where we demonstrated them and talked about floor checks at length. Some other really useful floor check topics could be using the different symptom clusters of PTSD or CPTSD and placing them throughout the room as different options and creating different prompts related to them. You could use the 5 domains of post-traumatic growth, which is one of my favorite prompts to use in my groups. And we get the group participants thinking about ways they've grown from trauma, ways that they would like to grow from trauma going forward. I find it really useful in training groups and organizational meetings to use the 6 trauma-informed principles as floor check options. So I place them throughout the room and ask different questions. Which principle do you feel is most central in your work as an individual? Which principle do you feel you could be better at integrating into your work? And which principle do you feel like you've grown the most in over the past year? So each of these prompts would create a different configuration of smaller groups of individuals clustered together based on shared experience. And it would give opportunities for really rich sharing in smaller groups again. So if you wanted to learn more about floor checks, I would encourage you to check out the other video that I created on this channel, which demonstrates them in action and talks about them a bit more in detail. And also check out chapter 4 in my book, which talks a bit more about floor checks. Tion Dayton also has a handful of different books and publications that address floor checks in detail. The next experiential sociometry tool I'm going to talk about is step-in sociometry, or circle of similarities. So this is a process where we invite everybody to stand together in a circle, and one at a time an individual will step into the circle and make a prompt, a statement about themselves based on the prompt or the theme. And as they step in the middle, anybody else that relates to that would step in the middle with them. So we can quickly identify shared experience, shared aspects of identity, shared goals, and other themes connections within the group quickly and efficiently. You can modify this exercise in many different ways. You could just go right around the circle and give everyone the opportunity to step in and make a statement about themselves. And each time everybody else steps in and then steps back out. You could do it popcorn style, where whoever wants to could take a step in. Or you could do it in a way that the facilitator makes all the statements and steps in. And this could be useful if you want to keep the process more contained and prevent individuals risking stepping in and saying something really difficult or vulnerable, perhaps related to their trauma, and risking that nobody else steps in with them at the same time. And this is a real risk of this exercise. You can modify this exercise for Zoom by using the camera feed on and off button, where individuals can turn their camera on if they relate to the statement that's made, and leave it off if they don't relate. So lots of different ways to do this exercise. It's important in terms of trauma-informed facilitation that you give everyone the affirmation to choose whether they want to disclose that they relate to something or not. So they always have the option to step in or not step in, even if they relate to the statement that's made. So this really emphasizes the importance of choice as a trauma-informed principle. As a facilitator, you'll have to also decide if you're going to step in when statements are made that you relate to. In terms of the trauma-informed care principle of transparency, it can be really helpful to use this as an opportunity for self-disclosure when appropriate, so that group members can get to know you better and feel safer and more comfortable and connected to us as facilitators. So step-in sociometry is really useful for illuminating unknown and unseen connections within a larger group. So I find this really useful, especially in the beginning phases of groups development. Just like with other sociometry tools, you want to be following that 3-phase clinical map to keep the process safe. So I might start with a prompt related, if we're doing a grief and loss group, for example, I might start with a prompt about what's one thing that has helped you manage and navigate grief and loss. And maybe each person gets the chance to step in and make a statement about one thing that has helped them. Then after everybody that wants to has taken a turn, then I would change and give a more difficult theme or topic. Now step in and share one aspect of grief and loss that has been really tough and difficult for you. Then the group gets to connect with shared difficulties related to the theme. And then I would end with something future-oriented. Step in and share one goal that you have for yourself related to navigating grief and loss going forward. So again, this is a really simple tool for illuminating connections in the group. If I were to do this in an organizational meeting about trauma-informed care, I could start by asking people to step in and state one way they feel like the organization is already implementing trauma-informed care practices and principles. Then I could move to a more difficult prompt and ask everyone to step in and name one way they feel like the organization could do a better job at integrating trauma-informed care. Then I could end with an integrative prompt at the end and offer for folks to step in and identify one goal they have for themselves about further integrating trauma-informed care principles into their work. So lots of different ways you can modify this tool, step-in sociometry or circle of similarities, for any group process. And if you wanted to learn more about that and see it in action, I would encourage you to check out the other video on this channel where we demonstrate it within a group. So next I want to talk about hands-on-shoulder sociograms. So this was one of the original sociometry tools that was created by Jacob Moreno long before he even created psychodrama. And sociograms were originally done pen to paper, but they also can be done experientially by asking individuals to put a hand on the shoulder of somebody in the group that answers the prompt for them. So this is an exercise that involves some physical touch. So it would be important, in order to keep it trauma-informed, that we first check in with the group about their comfort level and level of safety with physical touch. This is also important, especially for certain cultural and religious communities that you're really attentive to this piece related to physical touch. Of course, many trauma survivors have experienced inappropriate or unhealthy physical touch that was related to their trauma, which only makes it that much more important that we're careful with this exercise and that we check in with the group about physical touch before initiating this exercise. So there's different ways you could do that. You could do it with a spectrogram, 0 to 10. How comfortable are you with physical touch in the form of a hand on the shoulder? Or 0 to 10, how comfortable do you feel setting boundaries about physical touch? You could do it through a group discussion or make it part of the group norms and rules. Different ways that you could address this in the group. But it's important that you do address it. So basically, hands on shoulders is going to help you look at the distribution of connection and choices within the group. And it's going to help participants connect with each other in deep and meaningful ways. The way it works is we ask a prompt, and you ask everyone in the group to go put their hand on the shoulder of one person in the group. So, for example, if we were doing a group that was focused on relationships, for example, I could say, go and put your hand on the shoulder of someone in the group here who's sharing and whose presence in the group has helped you improve your relationships. Everybody would go put a hand on someone else's shoulder, and we'd be able to see the distribution of connection and choices within the group based on this criteria. This gives you an opportunity to facilitate some sharing with each question. You could have each person in the group share aloud why they chose the person that they chose and how their participation has helped them. Or you could have them share one-on-one with the person they chose about precisely why they chose them. So different ways to facilitate sharing with this. Then we could continue with additional questions. Put your hand on the shoulder of someone in the group that you would choose to play the role of your willingness to work on your relationships. Put your hand on the shoulder of someone in the group whose love for their partner has inspired you and helped you in your own romantic relationships. Put your hand on the shoulder of someone in the group who you would call if you needed relationship support or advice in the future. So a bunch of different questions that you could ask related to any topic, related to any content. This is an exercise where I find that group members find it harder to choose and to be chosen for negative prompts or criteria. So you'd want to be really thoughtful if you're going to use any more difficult or trauma-based prompts with this exercise. You also need to consider if you're going to use entirely sociometric, like real-time prompts, or if you're going to use more psychodramatic prompts related to pick someone who you would choose to play the role of your courage, of your vulnerability, of your mother, of your younger self, of yourself in the future. Those would be more psychodramatic prompts, whereas sociometric prompts would be more focused on the here and now experience. Put your hand on the shoulder of someone in the group who has helped you feel comfortable. Put your hand on the shoulder of someone in the group who has helped you understand your depression better. Put your hand on the shoulder of someone in the group you'd like to get to know better. These are more sociometric prompts. So I often like to use a combination of both in my hands-on-shoulder sociograms. These exercises can quickly evolve into some pretty cathartic and vulnerable moments, so you want to be sure that the group is in their window of tolerance, and you need to really be careful about keeping an eye on those who are being highly chosen, and especially those who are being unchosen in this exercise. So this is where the sociodynamic effect really will show up, and if you don't intervene and you aren't particularly thoughtful in the prompts you're offering, you're going to end up with individuals in the group that are unchosen after multiple prompts and who are feeling rejected, isolated, or even feeling triggered based on past experiences of rejection or isolation. So this is a real risk of this exercise. And I find this hands-on shoulder sociograms to be the most risky sociometry process. So if you're new to this, I would suggest getting familiar with all the other sociometry processes before you start to use this one. Sometimes you really have to think on your feet and be spontaneous. If you notice that somebody's being unchosen again and again, you might have to have the thoughtfulness and spontaneity, creativity to, as a facilitator, generate a new prompt based on what you know about someone who's being unchosen that makes them more likely to be highly chosen. So, for example, if I have a group member, once I had a group member who was being unchosen again and again and again and again in the exercise. And this was a group member who was like a big, strong, tough guy. And he had all these tattoos throughout his whole body and tattoos on his face. And he didn't share much about himself. And he was pretty guarded and defended. People in the group were intimidated by him. They were a bit afraid of him. And he was unchosen after multiple hands-on shoulder sociogram prompts. And I noticed it. So I created a prompt that would make him highly chosen. And what I did was I said, put your hand on the shoulder of someone in the group who you would want on your team if you were going to get into a fight with somebody. And naturally, every single person in this group put their hand on this guy's shoulder. And one at a time, they got to tell him how they experienced him and why they chose him. I chose you because I feel like I'd rather you be on my team than against me in a fist fight. I chose you because you look like you're pretty tough and pretty strong. I chose you because looks like you've been in a couple fights in your life and you know how to handle yourself. And after half of the group had shared with him why they picked him, he started to soften a bit, and he turned to the group and said, this isn't all of me, essentially. He said, because of my addiction, because of my trauma, my life experiences, I've had to put up walls and learn how to protect myself and not let others in. But I'm really a good guy underneath this tough surface. And he started to be vulnerable with the group and share with them other parts of himself beyond this guardedness and this wall and this tough exterior. And throughout the rest of the group exercise, he was much more highly chosen by the group than before this prompt. So you might have to think on your feet and create new prompts that you didn't originally plan to use based on who's being unchosen. And you'd want to create time after this exercise to process any feelings that came up for people about having to make choices, about what they were and weren't chosen for, and for folks that were highly chosen or unchosen. So again, this is the exercise from sociometry, I believe, has the most risk for causing harm or triggering folks or potentially re-traumatizing folks. As group facilitators and sociometrists, we have a real responsibility to avoid reenacting dynamics related to inclusion and exclusion within our groups. So we really need to be aware of this sociodynamic effect. So this exercise can also quickly evolve into different psychodrama vignettes. I could ask the group to put your hand on the shoulder of someone in the group who you would choose to play the role of you as a child. And obviously I wouldn't start with a prompt that loaded. That would be like halfway through the exercise. And then once they've made their choice, instead of telling their person why they picked them, I might say, I want you to imagine the person that you chose is you as a child for a moment. And I want you to offer a sentence to you as a child, something that you needed to hear back then and didn't get the chance to hear, something affirming or validating that would be helpful and offer some guidance about the years to come. And each person could take a moment to offer a statement to the person they chose as if that person was themselves as a child. And so we're quickly and seamlessly moving into short psychodramatic vignettes or statements. So again, this is an exercise that can be pretty intense, and you just want to be careful about how you're using it in terms of trauma-informed practice. And there's more content in my book in chapter 4 about thinking this through before using this exercise and how to keep the process as safe as possible. And the next and final sociometry tool I want to talk about is called the Circle of Strengths. So this is an exercise that uses sociometry as well as the psychodramatic intervention of concretization, which is where we take something that's invisible and we use an object to symbolically represent that. In this case, we usually will use scarves or shawls, some sort of fabric, to concretize and symbolize different strengths within the group. So this exercise is really inherently strengths-based in that it's focused entirely on strengths within group members, strengths within oneself, and strengths within the group as a whole. So there's lots of ways to do this exercise and lots of ways to modify it. The original way it was created was to have individuals choose a scarf that could symbolize a strength that they're bringing and can contribute to the group. So for example, an individual might choose a scarf that represents courage, and they might say to the group, I chose this, and to represent courage. This is a strength that I feel comfortable using and a strength that I can contribute to this group. My trainer who created this model, this intervention, was teaching it in Asia and tried to facilitate it in the same way that I just described. And the group kind of balked at participating. And they said that it wasn't very culturally appropriate to be identifying their own strengths. And instead, put their heads together and co-created a new way of doing this exercise, which has become our favorite and I think the most effective way of facilitating the Circle of Strengths, which is where you have participants identify strengths that they see in somebody else in the group instead of identifying a strength they see in themselves. Now, you can facilitate that in lots of different ways. You could have individuals in the group partner with each other and then identify strengths they see in their partner and exchange strengths back and forth. I chose this to represent your determination. I've seen you demonstrate this determination in the following ways. I actually find it best to ask everyone in the group to simply turn and look at the person on their right or on their left, and to identify a strength that they see in the person on their right, and then to go and choose a scarf to represent that strength, and one at a time to present the strength to the person on their right in front of the group. This avenue of doing it prevents the sociodynamic effects from impacting the group, in that you're not going to have a situation where somebody was chosen last to be in a dyad, or somebody was chosen last for their strengths to be acknowledged. Instead, it's simply based on where you're standing in the group, and it's a bit more random in that way. So you would just go right around the circle, and each person would take a turn to recognize their partner for a strength that they see in them, the person to their right. As the strengths are presented, it's important that they're presented directly to the other person rather than telling the group about the strength. You want to encourage group members to talk directly to their person and tell them directly about how they see that strength. So instead of, I see Scott demonstrate knowledge through his YouTube videos, for example, we would encourage someone to speak directly to Scott. Scott, I see you demonstrate knowledge through the ways that you've created your videos, just as an example. Hopefully you do find the videos knowledgeable. So you want to promote group members to talk directly to each other. It'll feel much more meaningful and much more vulnerable in that way than if they're talking about their partner. So once somebody receives a strength, we want to encourage them to take it in and really savor that. Notice how their partner experiences them and really own this strength, which can be particularly difficult for trauma survivors and for helping professionals, I've noticed. It's a lot easier for us to point out our vulnerabilities or our weaknesses or our character defects or areas of growth than to acknowledge our strengths. And this ties right in with PTSD and CPTSD symptoms, which lead to negative perceptions of ourselves and others and negative beliefs. So this exercise is really helpful in treating PTSD, and it can really help participants start to see themselves in a more positive light. Once an individual receives a strength, we would invite them to put it on the floor, and we would start to create a large circle of the strengths within the group. This circle serves as a reminder that everybody has an equal place within the group. It serves as a symbol of containment, that the collective strengths of the group can hold and contain anybody's traumas, anybody's feelings, and any memories within the group. And then the circle also serves logistically as a stage for the psychodrama if we're using this as a warm-up for a psychodrama. So this exercise is particularly useful for many different reasons. When I facilitate this exercise, I usually do multiple rounds. First, I might have the group members at the group level present a strength to the person on their right, one at a time. And this kind of sets the stage and sets the atmosphere for vulnerability within the group. Then I might say, all right, now turn to the person to your left, the person that just presented a strength to you. And next, you're going to present a strength to them. Choose a scarf that can represent a strength that can help them overcome their trauma and present it to them. And instead of presenting them one at a time, I might then switch to having everyone present it all at the same time to the person on their left, so that it's more of a private exchange of strengths and it saves a bunch of time. And then again, they add the scarves or the strengths into the circle that we're creating. Another round that you could use in this is that you could have group members identify a strength that they see in the entire group, and to, in a sentence, tell the group how they see them demonstrate that strength and add it to the circle. Another thing you could do is, if you're doing this in organizations, you could have staff members identify a strength that they experience in the entire organization and add it to the circle. This is actually one of the most helpful exercises I've found for organizational consultation, and when I go and provide on-site group therapy and psychodrama trainings at other treatment centers and universities and other organizations or agencies, I'll use this process to help promote overall organizational cohesion or group cohesion within the organization and help individuals in the group connect with each other in more meaningful ways. Sometimes when I use this exercise in my trainings, the clinical director or the owner or executive director or president of the organization will give me the feedback that just participating in the circle of strengths with the group and learning how to do that was worth the entire cost of having me come out on site, that it was so meaningful and enriching and uplifting that beyond all the tools that they learned and knowledge that they gained, just the experience of connecting and identifying strengths in each other and within the organization made the whole day worth it for them. So this is a really powerful tool. There's certainly ways you can modify this for other topics or to make it a little more vulnerable. For example, I could ask individuals to choose a strength that they feel like they need more of, and to share with the group a strength that they feel like they need more of. Often when I do that, with each person who shares, I'll then ask the rest of the group to raise their hand if they have already seen that person demonstrate the strength that they feel like they're lacking in. And inevitably, almost every time, almost every participant will raise their hand, and then I can give them the opportunity to reflect back to their peer about how they've already seen them demonstrate this strength. You could also do this for concretizing pretty much anything else. If we wanted to talk about values, we could have them identify values. If we wanted to do a group about coping strategies, we could have them concretize coping strategies, and so on and so on. So this exercise really promotes peer support, which is the third trauma-informed principle, while also highlighting a sense of mutuality and collaboration and empowerment within the group, in that we're empowering group members to empower each other, essentially, and we're promoting vulnerability with positive criteria before we start offering more difficult prompts later on in the group. This exercise helps group cohesion quicker than any other exercise that I'm aware of, and it's one of my favorite experiential processes to use in all of the groups that I facilitate. It's helpful to keep in mind that because this exercise can really challenge some negative beliefs that people might hold about themselves, that it can be pretty cathartic and emotionally powerful for group members. So you'll just want to keep tabs on where people are at and if folks need a little additional support throughout this exercise. It's not uncommon for clients in my therapy group during this exercise to have lots of emotions and to cry and to have a catharsis when somebody's presenting them a strength that they see in them. And again, this exercise is useful not just in therapy, but also in classrooms, in community organizing or activist groups. It's really helpful in organizations, and it can also be helpful in supervision groups. This exercise can be used by itself as an entire group process, and group members will walk away feeling like it was a pretty meaningful and powerful exercise. And it also can be used as a warm-up to a psychodrama, which is how I generally use it. It becomes really useful as a safety structure, and in that we have all of the strengths of the group concretized within the room in the circle of scarves, and the psychodrama takes place in the center of that. And if group members or the protagonist becomes dysregulated later in the group process, I can ask them to choose a strength from the warm-up, from the circle of strengths, that could help them with the feelings that are coming up. Or if somebody in the audience becomes dysregulated during the psychodrama, I could ask them to choose a strength that could help them process the feelings. Or if we have a really heavy psychodrama emotionally, when we come back to sharing, if I need to keep the group a little more contained and grounded, I could ask everyone to pick up one of the strengths from the warm-up as they come back to their chair to engage in sharing. So this exercise comes from the therapeutic spiral model of psychodrama, and it offers us a safety structure for working with trauma. I find this exercise works best with scarves, and if you're familiar with psychodrama, you would know that we often use scarves as props in our exercises. It's easy enough to get a collection of scarves by asking for donations, or by simply going to local thrift shops or rummaging through your closet to find scarves that or other fabrics that you're not using anymore. And to create a simple collection of scarves for this exercise and for other exercises. When I do this exercise, I usually dump the scarves in the center of the circle as the group is coming in or before they come in. And it really gets people's creativity flowing, in that they're getting curious about, what are we going to use this pile of scarves for? And usually group members will come in and start to make jokes about me leaving my dirty laundry in the group room or something along those lines, which allows us to tap into some humor and some playfulness, which is really important when we're doing trauma therapy, that we can laugh and we can have fun. Sometimes group members' defenses go up at the idea of playing with scarves or using scarves in the therapy group. But I find that very quickly they let go of those ideas and those defenses once we get into the process, and they see just how meaningful and powerful and helpful the exercise is for themselves and for their peers. So if you wanted to learn more about the Circle of Strengths, I would encourage you to check out another video I created on the channel here, which demonstrates this exercise in action with a group and talks about it a bit further. You can also learn more about it in Chapter 4 of my book, and any publications about the therapeutic spiral model will also talk about this exercise. So these are a handful of experiential sociometry tools that are particularly useful in groups of all kinds. Again, in this video, we covered using small groups, dyads and triads. We talked about spectrograms. Then we talked about locograms and floor checks, step-in sociometry, hands-on-shoulder sociograms, and the Circle of Strengths exercise. So when you're facilitating any sociometry processes, again, it's important to keep in mind these 6 trauma-informed principles to keep the process safe and to try to help participants titrate in and out of traumatic content during the sociometry exercises. Again, you can use these tools in any group. You can use them online or in person, in therapy groups, in telehealth sessions. Many of them can be modified in different ways for individual sessions as well. They're really useful in organizational meetings, in supervision sessions, in classrooms, and in community groups or activism. So if you wanted to learn more about sociometry and psychodrama and trauma-informed practice, I encourage you to check out some of the other videos on this channel. If you found this video helpful, it would help the channel and help the video reach more people if you were to click the like button and even subscribe to the channel here, and write a comment about what you found helpful. What experiential sociometry tools did you learn through this video? And let me know if you have any questions. I'm happy to help you and offer you other resources that can help guide you in safely implementing these exercises.